Welcome to the Software Lifecycle Stories podcast. We bring you stories of what worked and sometimes what did not in the course of discovering, designing, developing, delivering, and using software based solutions, as shared by practitioners who went through these situations. We continue our theme of conversations with women associated with IT in this episode as well. Today, my guest is Vandana Malaiya, whose career has seen roles in hardware, embedded systems, setting up team and organization level processes, setting up a startup venture, and being involved in a social venture, as well as senior leadership roles in the corporate environment. Vandana shares her perspectives on the need and opportunities to keep on learning, adopting standards and consistent adherence to outcomes, how economic and governmental systems can help or hinder startup aspirations, balancing career and family aspirations with support from her husband, physical and emotional challenges for women after 50, supporting girls and women become successful, and her tips on some of the typical challenges faced by all startups. Listen on. Hi, Vandana. Welcome to this episode of the Software Lifecycle Stories. I'm happy that you could make time in your busy schedule. I know that you're involved in a lot of activities. And we will, as usual, start with a brief introduction. If you can do that, explaining your background in terms of career interests and all that, we can take it forward from there.
Sure. So, hi, Shiv. First of all, thanks for inviting me for this podcast. This is my first, so I'm really looking forward to it. I started working in the IT industry in the mid-80s. And this was after graduating from BITS Pilani in electrical and electronics engineering. So I started as a hardware engineer. And therein, for almost 32 years, continued with the industry in various roles in various parts of the industry. So I started with hardware, moved on to embedded software, then did a stint on implementing quality processes. This was the first in the country. And then set up my own enterprise, where we were doing both software products development as well as providing services. And subsequently, after we sold that off, moved to a software services company. And then about a year and a half back, I decided to move to the social sector. So currently, I work primarily in the social sector, but also do some amount of consulting work, especially in helping my old clients in outsourcing in India. So that's kind of a brief on the work front. On personal front, I'm married, have a son, and who's working now. So more or less handled that part of the responsibility also. I live in Bangalore.
Yeah, wonderful. It's interesting that you started your career in hardware, because in the very first episode, I was talking about how I wanted to get into hardware. And another friend of mine got me into software, and then our careers actually crossed. He became a hardware person and I became a software person. So what was the shift like from hardware to embedded? That's probably one step closer to software, and then getting into software.
So I think the shift, as you said, from hardware to embedded was perhaps quite seamless, because even as part of doing the hardware design, we normally had to interact a lot with the folks who were doing the embedded software for the boards that we were designing. And we were continuously, literally working together on a single team to be able to get there. So that transition was, I think, fairly simple. However, the transition to software, where, as I mentioned, we always were working on products. In the initial years, most of it was product development. The shift to the software from embedded was, I would say, a little difficult. It was, relearning the languages that we were using at that point in time completely. We did have some exposure on that in the college, But after that, one had not programmed in anything but assembly and so on and so forth. Also, to get eventually used to the integrated environment, I think it took a while. I very, vividly remember the struggle that we had when we started learning C, and then eventually also moved to C, C++, from C to C++. Both were transitions which were interesting in terms of relearning the whole thing. And one of the lessons that taught me, I would say, and I'm sure a lot of people resonate with this, is that the IT industry, the software field has transformed so rapidly and so often that it becomes imperative that one keeps on learning something new, while use the learning of the past, but more or less you are starting afresh, and that's the beauty of it all.
Because I'm sure there is a lot more discipline in hardware development. Because once you finalize a design, when it goes into production, it's not probably very easy to make changes. So when you said that you also moved into a quality process role, and that too being the first, how did that transition happen? Were your standards very high that the teams would cry, or were you more accommodative and understanding?
No, so I think I have not ever been labeled as soft. So I wish that was the case when I look back. But um, the first of all, moving into the standards was something which happened because we felt that it was a need for the industry. When the company that I was working for was DCM Data Products, and we decided that we will adopt ISO 9001 practices. Frankly, there was just about one consultant that we could find in the country, Dr. Prakash Mutalik, who could help guide us on the processes. But other than that, we had no clues how to do, development with proper software engineering practices. Those days in college, we were not taught. At least I was not taught, and I believe most of my peers who were either from IITs or BITS were not taught adequate amount of software engineering practices in the college. So the whole learning process came to us through the fact that we have to do much better in the industry and with our product development, both hardware and software. And thereby we started looking at the ISO 9001 implementation. Now, I think, landed up being a lot more rigid, or the whole team, which was implementing the practices, because it was absolutely new. And we did not know where one could give leeway to the folks to not be so stringent about it, and where we should be necessarily stringent to see the outcomes that we were expecting. So I would say initial few years were being very stubborn about what need to be followed. And then over the years, when we started understanding much better, I think from a standards point of view, when we started understanding much better, we started relaxing out a little in areas. And also there was flexibility which came in because of the way, the whole thing went online. Different practices came into place and so on and so forth. But initial years, I would say I was pretty tough about it.
Nowadays, many process people start using the word outcome. Also, you talked about it. It's interesting that when you started out, you did mention that now you are looking at outcomes and getting the whole team involved. When people talk about agile or getting the team involved and all that, I guess that comes naturally. And what you've done seems to indicate that now you've gone about it in a more inclusive way. So is that one of the reasons why you said you also had your own company? You started something?
Yeah, so first on this inclusive, I think being a person who had gone through a few years of hardware engineering, embedded software, and software before I looked into quality helped a lot in gaining the confidence of the engineers that I was working with, and making them understand or help understand why it was necessary to follow the processes. And we were also able to tweak the processes to suit their requirements. So I think that whole background knowledge, and I think over the years, and I did come back and do this role again when I joined IBM. My, my advice to people had been that they need to have a proper stint in the development cycle before they start advising people on quality. Role of jumping directly into quality was something that I have never been in favor of. So, and that continued. Coming to setting up my own, I think that was a different ballgame. I come from a business family, and my interest in getting started on my own was right from the college days. However, while I discussed this perpetually with my batchmates and then some of my peers in my first job, I did not find any interested partners. And so when I moved and when I wanted to start up on my own, I think the environment in Delhi where I was working was not conducive for a woman to start off. There were kind of challenges which perhaps people in Bangalore would never even comprehend, including wondering why I was coming for a loan. Those days, venture capital was not possible, so the approach was to take a loan. So being questioned on whether I was trying to seek a loan for my husband or whether I was, really somebody who could go out, and if I had to travel in the night, I would manage to do that, and things like that. I think quite a lot of what I would call not so fair or sensible questions asked. So that kind of made me decide, and by that time I had got married and I had my child, but Delhi was not the place to start the business. However, when I moved to Bangalore and I had expressed this whole thing with my peers when I was joining Verifone, and those times they were my interviewers, that the whole objective for me is to move to the city and eventually I'd like to set up my business. I think things started happening very quickly. And again, one of the lessons that I learned in that process was that if you share your dream, then the world will conspire to make it happen. So starting off of the business was more a long-term dream, which got materialized with my peers from Verifone. And since the interest was product development, we actually started off with the mindset that we would do product development, while we all understood that some amount of services will have to be introduced for us to sustain the business. And that made us choose product development as the services that we would provide initially. And we did some other work also, but that was the primary goal.
Interesting. And, whatever you mentioned actually triggers, multiple questions. We'll see how many I can ask now. The first is, you did talk about the challenges that you faced in Delhi as a woman entrepreneur. Do you think that the situation has changed since then?
About Delhi, I don't know, Shiv, because I never went back and tried to do something in Delhi. I don't know if the mindsets of the people have changed much there, but the induction of a lot of venture capital in the market, I think, does make a difference to anybody who's looking at starting off.
Okay. So what would be your guidance for somebody who is wanting to start up, particularly women? What kind of resources are there in Bangalore, or can they approach you for some guidance?
Yeah, so they can certainly approach me for guidance. So, today, when I look at Bangalore especially, I think the play field is same whether it's for women or men. I think women deal with challenges which are very different at home, which have to be addressed by them, and then at the workplace. I think as a city, we should take a lot of credit in the fact that by and large, women and men don't get distinguished, at least in my opinion, don't get distinguished too much when it comes to the workplace. When you go to seek venture capital, there might be questions which get asked more for the person who's funding you to ascertain that the money is going to be fruitfully used towards the purpose, and you are in the game for long run, and your personal challenges are not going to bog you down. I think so. There might be questioning which I have heard from and read about where women feel that they have been discriminated against when it came to venture capital because they were women. I think it's anybody who's going to give you money is going to ensure that it is going to be used correctly, and so the questioning, unless it is done without empathy, I guess is okay. One of the things which most people forget, I guess, or let me put it as, it is important that when we are going to set up, we look at a good team. Trying to set up on your own sometimes can be challenging. While that might be only option at times, but ideally, it is good if there is a team which is in place where you share a lot of confidence. So one of the pluses for me when we set up Eximsoft was the fact that it was set up with peers where we already had a lot of bonding as well as trust amongst the partners. And that makes it extremely easy to tide through the rough patches. So I would say that is more important. And if your idea is good, if you have passion about what you're doing, I think funds will follow today.
Yeah, that's very reassuring. You did mention, one was the question you were asked about whether you want the loan for your husband. And later on, you also mentioned that women have additional pressures to balance at home and work. How have you been managing?
Okay, good one. So, first of all, I think I have always been very career focused. And so that meant that whatever else was happening in my life, that part I was not willing to give up at all. So, it is like it's a high priority and I'm going to do it. So then you start working around that fact. Initial years, and none of the cities that I've lived in had any of my family members. So the family support being possible was not there. However, I think over years, my husband realized that I am career oriented and he started helping quite a bit. So while we did hire help to help me with the child, and I left him at creche. When we were traveling, we had to make sure that only one of us was traveling, so that somebody was there to take care of my son. And I think that was one big balance to do. Second one was, be flexible. I don't think one needs to have the cleanest home all the time or have to have all kinds of dishes on the table all the time. I think throughout we were comfortable with a minimalistic approach to the food part, and use the weekends more to get set right things. So there was a lot of discipline that came in over years, where we started focusing that the time which we have at home has to go to the child, and that is the focus, not really the other things. And this to me was a big learning. Also, I think taught to me by one of my seniors, where I used to be a perfectionist with somebody wanting to have the house looking like a museum all the time. And this person kind of just sat me through and talked me out of it completely, saying, this is not what your priority is today. Your work and your child is your priority. So if you keep only two priorities, you're going to do a better job at it. And I think throughout that has been the case, that we have both husband and wife have been involved with balancing each other and adjusting to the priorities that the other had, so that we could both move forward in our careers.
That's interesting as well. In fact, one of the themes that I want to explore in some future episodes is about IT couples. So I'll get back to you and your husband in one of the future episodes.
Sure, look forward to that.
Okay, as a side question, with the both of you being in IT, did that have an influence on your son choosing his career?
Yes, it did have a negative influence on him choosing his career.
Oh.
So, especially towards the later part. So, when he was going through his teenage, I think the industry had moved from being a 9 to 5 industry to being a 24/7 industry. And so there was, the usual, if you're working for the US clients, or even sometimes for the European clients, you are on calls even in the evening until late night. So a lot of the times we would be home, but would still be on calls till late. And I think that was something which just did not appeal to my son, who is more or less an outdoor person. And so when he was looking at making a career choice, he was clear about what he was not going to do. I mean, other side is his passion, which he has finally pursued. But he was very clear that he did not want life sitting in front of a computer and phone running all the time. So for him, that was a deciding factor of not looking at the IT industry at all.
Yeah, I see that trend. Many youngsters are very, very clear about their priorities, which is good. So what helped you or made you switch to the social sector?
I think, Shiv, again, it is to do with where you come from in some sense. So I talked to you about priorities. A lot of what I did in my life, I think, has been influenced by a workshop that I attended on time management some 22, 23 years back. And that got me focused on to prioritizing what I would work on when. And so over the years, as time passed by, I wanted to go back and start looking at social sector, primarily because I came from a background where the family had done a lot of work in terms of building school, hospital, and orphanage, etc. So, and I had never been able to give back to the society. My only give back had been perhaps paying fees for some kids who needed that help. Which obviously, as you know, is just satisfying yourself, but it really doesn't make any other difference. So when I knew I had to look for a change. 50s is not an easy time for women, and there are a lot of hormonal changes that are going through, which I would say is a subject which I have now started speaking about a little more, primarily because I think the industry also should have, like they have for maternity, a provision. They should have a provision for helping women deal with the changes that happened during the early 50s. But when I was looking at taking a break or moving to something less less strenuous, I think it became clear to me that ideally I would go into the social sector. Now, my first few months when I was deliberating quitting, went in searching what I would do, because it is not easy to find the area in which you want to work, because you really don't know what you will enjoy. In my case, one thing was clear, that I wanted to do something with the women and the girl child. Primarily because for last 20 years or so, I have been involved with working on advancement of women in the workplace. And that was kind of something that I was very, very passionate about. So I said, I need to work in this space. And then I started talking to people and figured out, to a couple of venues where I could work in this space. So today I am extensively working with Home for a Girl Child, and where I'm also a trustee and the secretary. I also work with the school that they have, helping them with some of their operational activities, and work with a couple of other organizations which are working with the rural women population for making them self-employed or employable.
And these are not necessarily IT or IT related, right?
None of these are IT related. No, none of these are IT related. Okay. I do remain connected with the IT world through my consulting assignments, though.
Okay. Yeah, but then one thing which I'm trying to combine multiple things that you mentioned. No, one was that the IT industry moving from a 9 to 5 to a 24/7 kind of a model, at least in terms of demands on time. And probably that is particularly more applicable for startups in the initial stages when you need to have your initial paying customers and all that. What would be your tips or guidance or whatever startups can look at to encourage women in the workplace, including some things that you mentioned, as the company grows, as they grow in responsibility, and as they age, and some of the other physical needs that they have? How do you think startups can look at this?
So I think there are two challenges startups have. One you just mentioned, which is how do you make sure that the revenue keeps coming in. But the second one is also to do with finding the right talent. And I think when it comes to, especially with women, there is huge amount of talent which is sitting in the industry, which has given up work primarily because they are not able to cope up with the demands of working at night or odd hours, and inability to balance that much. I mean, so I think most people, most women who have been working are in a position to give 6 to 8 hours or even 10 hours to an organization. Maybe from home, some maybe from office, but in a balance of two, they would be able to give it. So I think the startups should positively look at leveraging the strength that sits today in the workforce in terms of women who are also in the workforce, but have some might have left the workforce and taken a gap of a year or two and are looking at coming back. But they are looking at coming back on their terms in some cases, which might be more like I will leave office every day at 5 o'clock, and which is perfectly okay, right? Because I think over years when I have worked even in IBM when we used to work with women, I think I was comfortable. They should be there in the office in the morning. 3:30, many of them left because the children would be back home, and they would log in again at 5:36 after having spent some time with the children. Maybe work another 2 to 3 hours or as was required. So that's not a challenge. I think it's only the mindset one has to tweak yourself into this working model that women require. I don't know an answer for the other question that you asked, Shiv, right? The 50s and the requirements which women might have, and is something which is not just the startups, but it's the whole industry that perhaps has to start looking at it, because it will be women at very senior positions who would go through it. I was at a workshop just a couple of days back, and I understand there is only 1% representation of women in the leadership in the country today, which means that from 30%, it goes down to 1% by the time it reaches the CXO level. And if one has to look at, improving this ratio for the talent that those women bring, then we have to have mechanisms which will help them cope through their 50s much better and continue in the workplace or get back to the workplace once they have, got over the issues. So I would say it is the whole industry that has to work on this.
Yeah. I was more interested in knowing many of these initiatives, which is around women empowerment or helping them build or regain their confidence and all are focused on women, which is needed and they need it. But what about the empathy for the colleagues or the men who also need to understand what women go through and how to support them?
Sure, sure. So, business idea for anyone who wants to pick it up, and I've been deliberating on this also a lot. So, I think you actually got it on the nail. Today, the need both in terms of the workplace as well as for parents who are raising kids. I think there is a need to build an empathy in the male child and in the males in the organization, as much as one is working on the women empowerment. So my current observation is that our girls have become very smart. They are intelligent. They have had the same opportunity now for some time, sort of for last few years, as were given to the boys in the family, and so they are coming out with flying colors. But when they start looking at either bosses who are empathetic, many times they don't get that, and that brings in the delusionment of the workplace. Uh, so both at home and when they get married, obviously if they don't find a partner who is equally supportive and giving them an equal helping hand at home, then balancing the work and home becomes a problem, and they tend to give up one, and I'm really meaning tend to give up one. So I think today, if somebody sets up a business which is working with men in organizations on training them how to handle basics at home, then I think many of their spouses would be able to continue to work. And they would bring in much better empathy to the workplace for the women who are working in their teams or with them, in understanding the challenges they might be going on at home. So I think a very much required shift, absolutely on the dot.
Yeah, good that someone else also thinks alike. Maybe we'll find something to do in the future.
Yeah.
The last question that I had, triggered by the conversation that we had so far, is the social sector and the philanthropic of the activities that you're involved in. Do you also encourage them to become entrepreneurs?
Yes. Okay. So as I said, I am working on two segments. So one of the segments where I work with the rural women, the whole focus has been to help them become entrepreneurs. And this has its own challenges. And so now with one group I've been working for over a year and a half. That was the first group I started with. The rural sector has a long way to go when it comes to women empowerment as compared to what the software industry has seen. So many of these women, while they are trained, they are capable, are very, very keen to go ahead and contribute and be on their own feet. The cycles that they follow for work is when nothing else is required at home. And that is not something which can run a business. So I went ahead, helped them create self-help groups, train them on how to run the business, how to get the business, deliver it, productize what they were making, and so on and so forth. But what I found is that capability to consistently deliver orders on time is something that is very dependent on whether there was something else that was required to be done at home. A wedding comes up, you'll find some people will vanish. There is festival season, they all want to take vacation and so on and so forth. So it's a different ball game, not that it cannot be done. And if the self-help group leader is very, very strong, they're still able to figure out and manage but it is not the same as IT industry.
Hmm. Yeah, nowadays I think there is this classification called the lifestyle business, where you will be intense, but then you also want your breaks. You've seen some things.
Shiv, it is. I don't know whether this is called lifestyle business because here it is more to do with the surroundings, their environment in which they are really, because they are from very, very backward areas or underprivileged background.
Okay.
So priorities are very different.
Hmm. So good that there are still areas to contribute. While some sectors, like probably education or this thing, is overcrowded in one sense, where a lot of corporates, everybody wants to do pretty much the same thing. But I guess these are all areas where really attention is needed.
Yes, but I would say education in the city perhaps has a lot of support and help from the corporate. As we go out away from the cities and start hitting the rural areas, even outskirts of Bangalore, I think there's a lot more that corporates can still do. Because children do need role models, and the more they see of the role models engaging, I will say more regularly and frequently, not just come once, have a picnic, or show for the children and go away. I think it has to be a more consistent, frequent engagement to take them through, their journey in their schools and get the aspirations kindled so that they can emulate these guys who are coming from the corporate world over a period of time.
That's a very valid point. So yeah, thanks a lot, Vandana. I think in a little over half an hour, we covered so many points, and we just probably touched the tip of some of them. As I said, hope to have you back with your husband in a future episode.
Sure. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And if there are any questions, we'll pass them on to you.
Sure, absolutely. Look forward to that.
Yeah. Thanks once again, Vandana.
Thanks, sir.
If you like the show and would like to share your experiences with the community or know someone else who might want to do that, please get in touch with us at podcast@pm-powerconsulting.com. That is podcast@pm-powerconsulting.com.
Please rate the show on Podchaser, Stitcher, iTunes, or any other podcast client that you find us on. Please also share our episodes with your friends and others in your network. If you or anyone you know would like to be featured on our show, do write to us at this email address: podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.